Germany will fund hundreds of missiles for Patriot systems for Ukraine, promises German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius. He was in Kiev just yesterday. Berlin's new aid package will include technical support for Iris-T systems, interceptor drones, and the DeepStrike and MiddleStrike programs. It involves funding long-range and medium-range strike systems to target Russian military infrastructure. Ukraine and Germany will jointly produce drones with a range of up to 1,500 kilometers. And Berlin will join the Ukrainian platform Brave One, which supports the development of military technologies. Developers will be able to receive funding, which will speed up the implementation of innovations at the front.
We recently signed and announced a major contract, and Germany has begun funding it. Starting next year, we will begin receiving these missiles, and for us, this is an unprecedented aid package.
We are going to support projects and their development between German and Ukrainian enterprises. The development of long-range drones is very important for strikes on Russian military infrastructure. If such drones are used en masse, they can successfully overwhelm the Russian air defense system. This is a separate area that we are working on very intensively within NATO.
Well, Europe is finally preparing its own negotiation track with Russia, without relying solely on Washington, as it is disappointed with Trump's actions, says European Council President Antony Kosta. Putin was quick to react. Supposedly, he will agree to negotiations, but only if he is satisfied with the composition of the negotiating group.
To define a common position for potential negotiations, the foreign ministers of EU countries will meet at the end of May, says the head of European diplomacy, Kaja Kallas. Well, while Europe's position can still be understood, the question arises, why has the Kremlin changed its traditional rhetoric?
The word Europe has long been a slur among the common people, and official Moscow habitually called the EU a hostile party, brandishing either its Oreshnik or nukes at Europeans. So what has influenced Moscow's empty talk so much? The weakening role of the United States? International sanctions? Or is it our long-range strikes on the Russian rear? Anna Hrishina reports.
When negotiations between Ukraine and Russia mediated by the US reached a dead end, and the Russian Federation effectively refused dialogue, Brussels decided to take on the role of chief negotiator.
Our main goal from day one is to achieve a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. That is why we support Ukraine. That is why we are imposing sanctions against Russia. And that is the same reason why we can participate in all peace negotiations to achieve a just and lasting peace in Ukraine.
The Kremlin immediately stated they're ready to see any EU leader as a negotiator who, quote, hasn't said nasty things about the Russian Federation. Putin named former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder as the best candidate, known for his close relationship with the Russian dictator.
I think that Gerhard Schroeder was a lobbyist, a high-level lobbyist for Russian state-owned companies. So it's clear why Putin wants him to be the person who would essentially sit on both sides of the negotiating table.
It's precisely because of Schroeder's reputation that Brussels rejected his candidacy, as the former chancellor played a key role in promoting energy cooperation between Germany and Russia. The result was the construction of 2 Nord Streams. He chaired the board of directors at Rosneft and served on the board of directors at Gazprom. Ukraine also does not support Schroeder's candidacy.
We have ongoing major peace negotiations led by the United States of America, and we need this path. We need United States leadership, but Europe could also play its own new role. I am discussing this path with my colleagues. And we're not talking about alternative peace talks, a peace or diplomatic path, but about complementary ones. Therefore, we are doing everything possible to bring peace closer. This is our strategic goal.
And Schroeder isn't suitable for it also because he still maintains a pro-Russian stance. Earlier this year, he criticized the so-called demonization of Russia, the sanctions against it imposed by the EU and Ukraine, and insists on resuming Russian energy supplies to Europe. And in Germany, they believe that Moscow, with Schroeder, only wants to imitate negotiations. At the same time, Russia has no room left for maneuvers. On one hand, EU sanctions choking the Federation's economy and Europe's military support for Ukraine, and on the other, massive Ukrainian drone attacks on military and energy infrastructure in Russia are forcing the Kremlin to the negotiating table.
Putin is in a weaker position than ever before. We see that on the battlefield, they are losing many lives. Dissatisfaction is growing in society. That's why the deep strikes carried out by Ukraine have truly had a significant impact. Support for Putin's war is falling.
In Brussels, Kallas, an experienced lawyer and diplomat, is seen as a likely candidate for the role of mediator in negotiations with the Russian Federation. Answering journalists' questions, she noted that she could see through the traps set by the Kremlin.
First, the EU wants to agree on common demands for the Federation to start peace talks, as Moscow currently shows no readiness for constructive dialogue, only putting forward demands to Ukraine. The EU plans to develop its strategy in late May at an informal summit in Cyprus, and only then will they choose a negotiator. From Brussels, Anna Hrishina, We Are Ukraine, Marathon United News.
Putin is threatening Armenia with a Ukrainian scenario if it fails to consider the Kremlin's position and align its European integration course with Moscow. Supposedly, a referendum must be held. For decades, Yerevan was considered one of Moscow's closest strategic allies. But after the war over Nagorno-Karabakh, when Russia distanced itself from the armed conflict, everything changed.
And since then, Yerevan has sought closer ties with the EU and last year passed a law to begin the process of joining the European Union. Well, a resounding slap in the face for Putin was the large-scale European Community Summit in Yerevan, attended by numerous European leaders, including the President of Ukraine. Yevgenia Tereshchenko will tell us about the Kremlin dictator's threats and Yerevan's new relationship with Moscow.
The Belarusian dictator, the head of Kazakhstan, the president of Communist Laos, and the supreme ruler of Malaysia. Among the leaders gathered for May 9th in the Russian Federation, the Armenian prime minister is absent. Nothing special, says Putin.
You know, honestly, we didn't really actually invite anyone to these events. Well, it's not a Jubilee event.
But the topic of Armenia won't let go. The Russian dictator mentions Yerevan's movement toward the EU. He hints broadly, a civilized divorce from Russia is only possible through a referendum. And he threatens a Ukrainian scenario.
And how did it all start? With the accession or the attempt of accession of Ukraine to the European Union.
Russia is an abusive partner. It will pressure from all sides to keep Armenia under its influence. There is plenty to blackmail with. This includes low tariffs, economic partnership, and energy dependence.
There will be no civilized divorce, and Russia letting Armenia go, that won't happen. For Armenia, the Russian Federation is its main trading partner and a special lever of influence, which is energy. For example, even the Russian Federation itself has recently been highlighting these figures, selling gas to Armenia for $177, while for European countries, it's $600.
Another weighty argument is the Russian military bases in Armenia.
We are witnessing threats from the Kremlin. And I think that in this way, Putin is making it clear to the Armenian government that the military base in the city of Gyumri, which has been there for many years, could be activated.
The Kremlin grew anxious following the peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And now these once hostile nations are establishing cooperation.
We are working closely with Azerbaijan.
We are working closely with Azerbaijan to strengthen and normalize peace between our two countries.
We started to supply.
For the first time, we began supplying our petroleum products, gasoline, and diesel fuel to Armenia.
Formally, Yerevan remains a member of the CSTO and the Customs Union, while simultaneously developing relations with European countries. Moreover, there is more and more talk about the Zangezur corridor, which will open the way for goods from Central Asia and China, bypassing the Russian Federation and Iran.
This transit path, it comes from the side of, especially Armenia, from the side of Azerbaijan and the side of Turkey.
But the 8th summit of the European political community caused a real hysteria in Moscow. More than 40 leaders of European states, the leadership of the EU and NATO, as well as Volodymyr Zelensky, gathered in Yerevan.
A signal to Putin that you are losing influence even over those whom you didn't consider human at all. It turns out that Armenia has its own identity, its own character and subjectivity, which it demonstrates on the international stage, which greatly irritates Russia. It irritates them greatly that so many European leaders have come to Armenia. It's very irritating that Armenia declares its desire to join the European Union They are, of course, very irritated that Volodymyr Zelensky freely arrived on the territory of a state where Russian military bases are located.
Fuel was added to the fire by the Armenia-EU summit and partnership agreements with France and Britain. Russian propagandists were foaming at the mouth, calling the meetings in Yerevan a coven of Russophobes, because the Kremlin's main fear is the loss of influence.
At least over the countries of the former Soviet space. No one wants to deal with him, with Putin, because he brings grief to those states that start to be friends with him. He brings to this state problems with relations with others, with other allies, with European countries. He brings to this state, in fact, the loss of identity, independence, and subjectivity on the international stage.
On June 7th, parliamentary elections will take place in Armenia. The country which Russia considered under its control may break free from the suffocating embrace of the Kremlin because Pashinyan's party is heading towards the EU.
If we are accepted into the EU as a member state, we will be glad and happy.
The alternative is Putin's friend Robert Kokaryan. Russia is actively promoting him while simultaneously conducting propaganda in Armenia against Europe, Turkey, and Azerbaijan.
It will try as much as possible to talk about the fact that most likely gas agreements will be revised and these customs tariffs. It will conduct this kind of hybrid information campaign to somehow have an influence on the part that has not decided.
Since 2022, Moscow has been losing influence in geopolitics. Syria, some African countries, Venezuela, and Azerbaijan have slipped out of the Kremlin's orbit. Everything is complicated with Cuba and Iran, so Armenia is important for the Kremlin.
Russia is trying to use all its leverage, all its capabilities and resources to maintain its presence in the South Caucasus region, because this is a very important region for Russia's access to the Middle East and to Asia as a whole. Putin's defeat in Armenia will trigger a new chain of, let's say, weakening of Putin's vertical in Russia itself.
On the one hand, Yerevan has a trump card. Turkey and the United States are interested in cooperating with it. But will this be enough to keep Russia from interfering in Armenia's politics?
There are many intelligence elements in Armenia, many Russian intelligence elements in Armenia. Over the years, they have settled everywhere there. Putin can bet on an explosion from within. We could even witness a military coup.
It is important that the Americans and Europeans do not allow this. At the same time, for Ukraine, the so-called divorce of Armenia from the Russian Federation is an opportunity.
We can enter into closer allied relations. Ukraine is already starting to position itself as a country that brings new types of security and defense. And everyone understands that Ukraine is very well versed in this.
Ukraine is interested in small alliances. In addition, we can become a logistical link in a trade route connecting China and Europe. Yevgenia Tereshchenko, We Are Ukraine, Marathon, United News.